Ladies and gentlemen, I have had a couple comments now asking to make a video on the greatest NBA players to never score 50 points in their entire careers. I mean, in a single game, of course. You have players like Malachi Flynn over here dropping 50, so there are going to be some very unexpected names on this list. Some of these guys regarded as cutthroat scorers, and almost, if not every player on this list is set to go to the Hall of Fame if they're not already in there. Let's see how many of these names catch you guys off guard. Starting it off with Kevin Garnett, whose career high in points is 47. While it kind of makes sense that he wasn't scoring a crazy amount of points while he was a member of the Big Three in Boston alongside Ray Allen and Paul Pierce, it is kind of crazy to believe that the big ticket never had a 50 bomb during his first 12 seasons that he carried the Minnesota Timberwolves. During this era, KG was amongst the top talents in the NBA, able to do almost everything on both sides of the basketball. The closest Garnett ever came to scoring 50 points took place on January 4th, 2005 in a game against the Phoenix Suns. This was an extremely tough matchup for Minnesota, with the Suns entering the game with a 26-4 record, but Garnett was not going to back down from this challenge. He came out of the gates hot, scoring on 6 out of his 9 shot attempts and finishing the first quarter with 12 points. After playing the entire first quarter, all 12 minutes, Garnett saw a little bit less time on the floor in the second, of course, which is normal, about 6.5 minutes. Despite this, he was still able to score another 10 points, making 3 shots from the field and knocking down 4 free throws. Now, even with Garnett ending the half with 22 points, the Timberwolves still found themselves down at 65-58. Coming out of that locker room, KG racked up another 11 points, but the Suns continued to pull away and increase their lead. With Minnesota down 15 heading into the fourth, the team leaned heavily on their franchise player to lead them to a comeback. Garnett posted a plus-minus of positive 14 in the fourth and did his part, scoring 14 points, but it was not enough to win the game. Phoenix picked up their 27th win of that season by a final score of 122-115. However, KG gave it his all, finishing that game with 47 points, 17 rebounds, and 4 assists while shooting 67.9% from the field, just 3 points shy of that 50-point mark. Now, our next player up defined an entire era of the NBA and somehow still did not have a single 50-point game in his illustrious career. While the most valuable features of Magic Johnson's game were his generational passing ability and otherworldly size at the point guard position, he was still a very talented scorer. I feel like his name being on this list will come as a shock to many. Johnson's career high game came on December 23rd, 1986 in a game against the Sacramento Kings. Even with Johnson's Los Angeles Lakers coming into the matchup with a record of 19-6 to the Kings' 8-17, they pushed LA to their limits. This game went into overtime and Johnson was forced to clock 48 minutes. Even with him clocking an insane amount of time on the floor and the game being pushed to OT, Johnson fell short of the 50-point mark by just 4 points. He finished this game with 46 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists while making 17 of his 36 shots from the field and going 12 for 16 from the line. Had he focused a little bit more on scoring this game rather than facilitating, there's no doubt that Magic could have hit the 50-point mark for the first and only time in his career. But he was always that player that preferred creating open shots for his teammates rather than forcing shots of his own. This kind of leadership and play style led to the Lakers picking up a 127-117 win in this game, and looking at the bigger picture, Johnson winning 5 rings in his career. Now, I'm sure he's absolutely fine never scoring 50 since he has so many other accomplishments. Up next, we have a player that came close to hitting 50 points 3 separate times in his career, but shockingly has never been able to crack the number. While he will be remembered more for his elite defensive skills rather than his scoring ability, Kawhi Leonard is another player that has never had a 50-point game. While it's not surprising that it never happened during his time with the San Antonio Spurs, it seems like it almost had to have happened once or twice on the Toronto Raptors or the Clippers. That's not the case. Leonard has been able to tie his career high 3 different times at 45 points, twice with the Raptors and once with the Clippers, but has never been able to reach that 50 mark. His first 45-point game came on January 1st, 2019 when the Raptors took on the Utah Jazz. Kawhi got his new year started off on the right foot, absolutely torching the Jazz on offense. Leonard posted a respectable 10 points in the first quarter, making 4 out of his 6 shot attempts and sinking a pair of free throws. Due to only playing nearly 7 minutes in the second quarter, he was only able to muster up 5 points. But heading into the half, almost nobody could have predicted that Leonard was about to set a career high that night. However, that's exactly what happened. He only played 17 minutes in that second half, but made every second count, scoring 30 points on 10 of 12 shooting from the field, and picked up an additional 10 points from the charity stripe. Toronto needed almost all of Kawhi's 45 points that night as they narrowly escaped with a victory, 122-116. And it did not take him long to score 45 again, putting up a game to remember in Game 1 of the 2018-19 Eastern Conference semifinals against the Philadelphia 76ers. Leonard set the tone of this series early in the first quarter, scoring 17 points on 7 for 9 shooting from the field and knocking down both of his free throw attempts. After another 10 points in the second quarter, Kawhi entered the half with 27 points in only 20 minutes played. While he was ultimately unable to match his scoring pace in the first half, Leonard continued to be a massive problem for the Sixers, scoring 18 points in the second half to tie his career high of 45. Toronto took Game 1 of this series by a final score of 108-95, and his most recent 45-point game came once again in the postseason, this time as a member of the Clippers against the Dallas Mavericks on June 4th, 2021. Even with him sharing the offense with Paul George, Leonard stepped up in a huge way for LA in this game, keeping the Clippers' season alive in a closeout game. He did get off to a slow start in this one, finishing the first quarter with just 3 points, but he began to show signs of life in the second. After that 1 for 3 start in the first, he shot 6 for 8 in the second and scored 13 points. However, he flipped a switch in the second half, going off for 29 points and finishing the game with his third 45-point game of his career. The Clippers desperately needed a game like this out of the face of their franchise, as even with his 45 points, they were still only able to win this game by 7. Now, Kawhi is not the only player, though, that tied a career high just short of the 50-point mark more than once in their career. Similar to Magic Johnson, Chris Paul is yet another Hall of Fame caliber point guard who is much more known for their talents as a passer than a scorer. But don't get it twisted, during his prime, Paul was a bucket. Despite never cracking 50 points thus far in his 19-year career, he has scored a career high of 43 points 2 times. The first occurrence of this took place on December 7, 2007, where his New Orleans Hornets took on the Memphis Grizzlies. In the first quarter, it did not look like it was going to be a special night for Paul as a scorer, as he only put up 6 points, was a little bit more focused on assists with 4. More of the same occurred in the second quarter as he entered the half with only 14 points. A huge second half saw Paul light up the Grizzlies for 22 points while shooting 50% from the field and 60% from 3. However, even with his 36 points in regulation, it was still not enough for the Hornets to pull away, and this game was sent to OT, with the game knotted at 107. In OT, Paul took matters into his own hands and scored 7 of New Orleans' 11 points in the extra period, giving the team a narrow 118-116 win and achieving a career high of 43 points for him. Now, the following season, on April 3rd, 2009, he had yet another 43-point game, this time against the Golden State Warriors. In this matchup, Paul came out of the gates with a much larger emphasis on scoring, dropping 11 in the first quarter alone. After only playing 5 minutes in the second, he entered halftime with 18 points. An 8-point third quarter made tying his career high an uphill battle to say the least. However, in the fourth, Paul scored an impressive 17 points despite struggling from 3. He finished that game with his second 43-point game of his career, but even with an elite scoring night from CP3, the Warriors still won this game by a final score of 111-103. Now, our next player up had 50 rebounds in a single game, 51 to be exact, but was never able to score 50 points or even really close to it. Bill Russell is the poster boy for the traditional center archetype. Standing in at 6 feet 10 inches tall, he was one of the most talented rebounders and shot blockers that the game has ever seen. As a result of the talent that surrounded him throughout his elite run with the Celtics and his style of play, he was never a player that scored an insane amount of points. But when taking into account that Russell once had 51 rebounds in a game like we just said, it's pretty insane to think that he never scored 50 plus. Twice in his career, he scored a career high of 37 points. The first instance came on March 5th, 1961 against the Philadelphia Warriors, and this was a tough matchup for Russell with Wilt Chamberlain on the other side of the ball matched up against him. Both centers played all 48 minutes in that game and made it a game to remember. When things were all said and done, Chamberlain may have had the better individual stats, but Russell and the Celtics ended the game with a victory, 146-129, and for Russell, it was a career night. He posted a very impressive 37 points and 25 rebounds. When taking into account that this was done against Chamberlain, who was a few inches taller than him and a feared shot blocker himself, it made it even more impressive. Russell's second 37-point game came on December 17, 1967 against the Los Angeles Lakers. Russell led both teams in scoring that night and also put up a very impressive 19 rebounds and 7 assists as well, while shooting 73.9% from the field. Despite an elite performance, this was still a very close game with the Celtics coming out on top just by a final score of 123-117. Now keep in mind, when Russell was playing, there was no three-point line, so just another reason why the 50-point mark might be a little bit harder to achieve back then. Despite being one of the league's stars and the face of our franchise at one point in time, this next Hall of Famer up shockingly also fell just short of ever scoring 50 points. On January 20th, 2010, during his time with the Toronto Raptors, Chris Bosh set a career-high 44 points against the Milwaukee Bucks. He started off this game with a very respectable 9 points in the first quarter. However, he turned up the heat in the second, putting up 13 points while shooting 5 for 6 from the field and making all 3 of his free throw attempts. Bosh had a very strong second half as well, scoring another 22 points, giving him his career high. Despite all his efforts, the Raptors still fell short in this one by a final score of 113-107. There's not really much more he could have done in this game, getting his 44 points very efficiently, shooting 57.7% from the field, only missing out on 1 of his 15 free throw attempts. It had to be performances like this that were still not enough to get the Raptors a win that pushed him to team up with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade in Miami the following offseason. Our next Hall of Famer up came just 1 basket short of avoiding this list, but ultimately, he's on here. Steve Nash is now the 3rd point guard on this list that, despite being one of the top talents at the point guard position, is best known for their elite passing and playmaking ability. However, as a 2-time MVP, it still comes as a little bit of a shock that he never had a 50-point game throughout his 18-year career. Nash set a career high on May 15, 2005 against the Dallas Mavericks in his first season back with the Phoenix Suns. This game took place in Game 4 of the Western Conference Semis, with the series 2-1 in favor of the Suns. Nash led the team in scoring in the first quarter with 8, and after a relatively quiet second quarter, he went into the locker room with 13 points, far from what was needed for a career night. But then he exploded in the third quarter, scoring 23 of the Suns' 29 points. Nash finished that contest with 48 points while shooting a ridiculous 71.4% from the field, 66.7% from 3, and 100% from the line. Despite coming up just short of the 50-point goal, 48 at the end of the night for him, in the most efficient way possible, Nash's efforts also weren't enough as the Mavericks took this game by a final score of 119-109. Now I want to take a look at a guy who averaged nearly 32 points for an entire season, but you're going to tell me he never scored 50 in a single game. Early in his career, Walt Bellamy was a walking bucket. He came into the league as a scoring machine, averaging 31.6 points per game in his rookie season, with only Wilt Chamberlain averaging more. Despite this insane average for an entire season, Bellamy is another all-time great that was never able to crack the 50-point mark. He tied his career high of 48 twice, but was never able to seal the deal with that final bucket. His first 48-point game came in his rookie season on January 21st, 1962, where his Chicago Packers took on the Los Angeles Lakers. This game was an extremely hard-fought battle on both sides of the ball, with it going to overtime. Bellamy lit up this talented Lakers team for 48 points and 14 rebounds, making 17 shots from the field and cashing in on 14 of his 18 free throw attempts. Despite this, the Packers fell just short in overtime, losing by 1 point. 2 years later, as a member of the Baltimore Bullets, Bellamy matched his career high on December 4th, 1963. It appears that he had a personal vendetta against the Lakers, playing some of the best basketball of his career against this team. In his matchup against the Lake Show, Bellamy once again torched them for 48 points while shooting 64.5% from the field and 80% from the line. Along with this, he pulled in a ridiculous 29 rebounds. While the Lakers got the best of him the first time around when he set his career high in 1962, Bellamy got his revenge in this matchup, with the Bullets coming out on top by a final score of 118-98. While Bellamy's top 2 scoring performances came through the first 3 years of his career, this next Hall of Famer did not set his career high until he was 34 years old. When looking at Pau Gasol's legendary career, many would have thought that scoring 50 points for him would be a walk in the park, but that wasn't the case. While it would have been difficult to do while sharing the court with Kobe, of course, and the Lakers, he served as a main scoring option for the Grizzlies throughout the majority of his 5.5 years with the team. However, his highest scoring game did not come with either of these teams and instead occurred during his first season with the Chicago Bulls when Gasol was 34 years old. On January 10, 2015, the Bulls took on the Milwaukee Bucks, and even with the Bulls finishing this game with a collective 95 points as a team, Pau made sure to put this team on his back and get his. He started the game off with a ridiculous first quarter, scoring 20 of Chicago's 29 points while only missing 3 shots from the field and making all 6 of his free throw attempts. Gasol finished the first half with 28 of the Bulls' 48 points, absolutely torching the Bucks. Things got no better for Milwaukee in the second half as Pau came out of that locker room and gave them another 12 points in the third before finally coming back down to earth and going 1 for 3 from the field and knocking down 4 free throws for 6 points in the fourth. Had he been able to keep up the intensity in that fourth quarter or play the entire quarter, there's a strong chance that he could have hit this 50-point mark, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. Regardless of this fact, this was an awe-inspiring performance from a 34-year-old Pau Gasol. Not only did he set a career-high 46 points, but he also willed the Bulls to a 95-87 victory, scoring nearly half of the team's total points by himself. To put the cherry on top, along with his ridiculous 46 points, he also pulled in 18 rebounds. Now guys, I know there is a ton of NBA players that haven't reached this 50-point threshold that you probably want me to cover in part 2, and if that's the case, let me know in the comment section down below, and of course, as always, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next one.